This is one of those circle your calendar games from the time the schedule was released. Welcome into Hawkeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. Corey and I get together, of course, each and every Tuesday, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 where it counts. And it's Ohio State week for Iowa. We've got Pat Murphy down below from Bucknuts 247 Sports. Corey, of course, appreciate you being here. This is the guy that makes the show go for us each and every week. And of course, Corey and Don Patterson got together last night. So check out that Hawkeye Hangout, as that was a excellent breakdown on the game as well. Pat, we appreciate you being here for the breakdown as well.
Yeah,
I think it's a record. I think Mark set a record for length of time spent on one of my shows in the chat. Like normally if Mark bothers to stop by, he stops by for maybe 5-10 seconds. I think he gave us like 5-10 minutes last night. You must have
that's pretty
had
accurate.
Some huge meeting that got canceled for you to spend that much time over on my channel. So I appreciate that.
When you first said 5 to 10, and then I thought you were going to say minutes, and I was about to say no, it's more like seconds. And then last night I was around for more than 5 or 10 minutes. I think might have been 12.
I think,
but anyway, we've got Pat for about 20. So
okay,
we will. Let's dive into the matchup. I will get started, and then certainly in these situations, I like to kick back and hear from you two on this matchup. So, Pat, finally, we got a decent opponent against Ohio State this past week. For people that didn't see the game, maybe saw some highlights, saw 38-7, they may take something from that as maybe Ohio State just put it on cruise control, but there was certainly some competitive football there in the first half, and Michigan State made some plays. The total offense was only 249 yards, which I was a bit surprised with because Michigan State had its opportunities. They certainly hit some plays down the field in the first quarter and first half and had their opportunities. So this Ohio State defense that they would like to pride themselves as one of, if not the best in the nation, showed a few chinks in the first half.
Mark, when you say maybe people didn't watch the game, are you suggesting that not everyone tuned into that incredible Peacock broadcast that was Saturday night? We don't need to go down that rabbit hole too much, but I did rewatch a lot of the game. I can understand why some people are disappointed with the Peacock broadcast. It is not the finest one. But anyway, speaking of not the finest, Ohio State's defense, the first half was not great. And Jim Knowles today talked about that they've started slow really the last two games, and they have made adjustments, held Michigan State to 60 yards total in the second half. Unlike 2 weeks ago, there was no injury to a quarterback there that could kind of be the justification for a better second half. So I think the positives is that Ohio State can adjust when teams maybe do something that they're not expecting. I think the negative is this has now happened twice to two offenses that Marshall's certainly not, a team you would be worried about if you're Ohio State's defense. And maybe that was part of the problem. And then Michigan State, it's an offense with a young quarterback who can make some throws, but isn't perfect. He did get two receivers back last week, which certainly helped matters. But I do think this defense needs to start getting off to faster starts. I mean, they were able to end the only two Michigan State drives that really moved the ball. Both of them ended in fumbles in the red zone. So opportunistic by Ohio State. The one scoring drive came after a Will Howard interception that set the ball up at, I think, the 16-yard line. Bad field position for the Buckeye defense there. But if you came into the season thinking this was going to be a dominant defense, and look, statistically, they still are, but it has the last 2 weeks probably have you scratching your head a little bit. And maybe as you get into Big Ten play a little bit more here, things kind of ramp up and the defense comes alive earlier. Or maybe this becomes a trend this season with having to sort of figure things out in the first half and adjusting the second.
It's on you, Corey. You guys can
Mark's wanting
spice
me
it
to
up here.
talk. I can tell. Well, here's the deal. I spent like 2 hours talking with Coach Patterson about this matchup last night. Of course, Coach and I both watched the game Saturday on Peacock. It was not too boring for me to tune into. I'd much rather watch Iowa's next opponent than basically any other game in the schedule. Here's what I take away, and I haven't published my official preview on the channel yet. I'll do that this evening. But you look at the box score, you look at the stat sheet. To me, the three things that stand out as it relates, Pat, to the victory. Of course, turnovers, you mentioned those. We'll get back to those and specifically where those turnovers occurred. You mentioned the red zone, killer. And then critical downs, what a difference there. Because some of these stats were one-sided, but they weren't, ridiculously one-sided. Ohio State was, if I did the count right here, 11 of 21 on critical downs. Michigan State was 2 of 10. So quite a differential there. And then just Michigan State's inability to run the football. Ohio State really healthy on the ground, 5.3 yards per rush. Michigan State under 2. So you would have to think, this is kind of trying to assume Iowa gets a similar Ohio State team this Saturday, that Iowa should be able to compete with those numbers rushing the football. Now, Ohio State's been good against the rush, right? This has been the one test. So that's kind of a small sample size. So against the only quote unquote good a team they've played, they were really good against the rush. Now, I don't know, Mark, you know more about this Michigan State offense than I do. I know Aiden Childs has been really erratic. Have they been able to run the ball on anyone?
Well, much better than this. Yes.
Yeah.
They ran the ball pretty well against Boston College. I don't know what the numbers were against Maryland, but they scored almost 20 or 30 points in that game.
Yeah, unlike Ohio State, Michigan State had actually been tested with Power 4 opponents prior to Saturday's game. So I would assume Ohio State's going to be Iowa's biggest challenge yet against the run. Minnesota did not prove worthy of stopping the Iowa run, and the Iowa offensive line that has greatly improved from 2 years ago when the Hawkeyes visited Columbus. But I think those three categories, turnovers, critical downs, certainly running the football is just a basic element, right, of any Big Ten game, especially an Iowa game. If Iowa goes out there and can't run, it's almost impossible for them to win this game because they're not going to be able to open things up with the pass. I would be very surprised. I guess never say never with the new offensive coordinator, but even in the past, like they needed to be able to run the ball like they did in 2017 and then hit a few big plays like they did in 2017 with Hawkinson, with Fant, with Amir Smith-Marset, or whoever's in position to make plays. And I think Iowa, the good news here is having an extra week off. Not only are you able to kind of look back at your 4 games in which they had opportunities. Tim Lester talked about that, Mark, during his press conference last week. They've had opportunities to take shots. In some cases, there's been, a small issue here with wide receiver route timing, been an issue here with Cade. We know he missed a wide open Jacob Gill in the corner of the end zone against Iowa State that had he made that throw to a wide open Gill for a 8-yard touchdown, they're 4-0 right now. And then there have been other situations where Lester made it very clear the coaching staff has kind of pulled the reins back a little bit on taking those deep shots, maybe to save those, maybe just because, hey, we'd rather run the football and score 24 straight points against Minnesota. And Mark, you and I didn't talk about this on the show last week, but I went back and rewatched Iowa's game against Minnesota, the condensed version. Iowa scored 24 points in the second half by the time they hit the 11-minute mark of the fourth quarter. So literally, they outscored Minnesota 24-0 in the second half, and they just sat on that lead with 11 minutes to go. So that's a lot of points, especially when you're not throwing the football very well. And that's really the result of a defense that was getting the ball right back to its offense quickly, and it was creating explosive plays on the offensive side. So I was intrigued by those 3 categories. I'm also intrigued, Pat, to get your insight on Devin Brown's usage. We saw him with a touchdown throw to Jeremiah Smith. I know everybody was looking at the catch by Smith, but hey, I haven't watched much Ohio State football, particularly because they played a really, what's the word? I don't want to be disrespectful. Mark will take offense if I criticize
I
the
will not take
schedule,
offense.
It's been
However,
bad.
I
Wing.
said the same thing. It's the worst non-conference schedule in the country.
Yep.
Yeah, they played the worst, but it's all in front of them
played,
now. That those games are over.
They have played a sugar-free pound cake schedule through 1 month is what they've done.
That's,
All right.
that's a more colorful
And
way to put it.
I'm
Sure.
also intrigued by running back usage because everybody's talking about two guys right now. At least that's my perception here in Iowa. They're talking about Caleb Johnson. They're talking about the kid from Boise State, Ashton Genty, because both those guys have put up ridiculous numbers through the first month of the season. But everybody was talking about the Ohio State running back room. They're just so deep. They use so many guys. I mean, look at the stat sheet from Saturday, and they are really sharing the ball around. It's not like Trevion Henderson is dominating carries. Quinshon Judkins had 11. James Peoples had 10. And then, of course, you had a few carries for the quarterback. So I guess maybe we can start there. How good is this running back room for Hawkeye fans who've not seen it together collectively? Mark, you just want to take over. You just love hearing anything about Ohio State skill position players. You just flock
my
towards
goodness,
them.
these
Maybe
two
Mark
guys.
wants to take over.
I'll let Pat
I know he just
describe
loves
these
the
two
skill
guys.
position. Go ahead.
Well, look, I mean, you've got Trevion Henderson, who, when healthy, has the talent to be one of the best running backs in the country. Now, he hasn't been able to really show that probably since his freshman year, at least consistently. And then you added Quinshon Judkins, who was an all SEC player the last 2 seasons, to the room. And so on paper, it was going to be one of the better running back rooms in the country. You obviously need the offensive line to block. They have kind of come together each week. They missed Donovan Jackson, the left guard, the first 2 games, but he's been back now 2 games and has fit right back in. So it's been going well. Now, I will say last week against Michigan State, the Spartans loaded the box and basically dared Ohio State to throw the ball more, and they did. So, it's only 185 yards. Neither running back gets over 70 yards. Neither running back gets in the end zone, but they ran enough to keep things going, keep the play action, though there was less play action than we'd seen in the non-conference from Will Howard. But they ran enough to kind of keep Michigan State's defense honest. It wasn't, Spartans didn't seem like they wanted to get out of the box all that often. And so Ohio State took what was there. I think it will be interesting to see what Iowa's approach is, right? Do you decide, okay, let's shut down these 2 running backs as best we can? Or do you focus more on the receivers and hope maybe the offensive line, some of the struggles that you saw in week 1, if you watch Ohio State against Akron, kind of come back up against a better defensive line, and maybe they haven't made the progress on the offensive line that they thought. Obviously covering these receivers, that's a whole separate topic. But yes, I mean, just, pound for pound, running back for running back, it's, Quinshon Judkins and Trevion Henderson, I think would go up with any other duo in the country. And you mentioned James Peoples. A lot of his work came in the fourth quarter when the backups were in the game. But he is somebody that's interesting. And Trevion Henderson went down at one point in this game, went to the medical tent, and Ohio State only has 4 scholarship running backs, and 2 of them are true freshmen, including James Peoples. And I like James Peoples. I think he's going to be a talented back. What we've seen has been very good, but asking him now to step into a bigger role would be interesting, just given he's a freshman and hasn't had a ton of experience when the game really matters, though he has had some, probably more than I would have guessed given the 2 guys in front of him.
Yeah, I don't know that Iowa's going to lose this game, Mark. I don't think either one of us said that preseason. I think most people assume that heading into the season when you're picking these games, that this is one of Iowa's maybe 2 to 3 losses. Anything less than 9-3 is a disappointment. I stand by that in spite of that loss early to Iowa State. But I will say this, when you're playing in a game like this, we talk about the run game being as important as it is, but to me, you've got to be able to look at this. First of all, this Ohio State team clearly has very few weaknesses, right? You're not going to be they were preseason number 1 on ballot, so to speak. So, I mean, what do you take advantage of? I think the first thing is, I know Mark doesn't necessarily agree with this. He made a comment last night in the live chat about quarterback. You're higher on Will Howard than some people were heading into the season. Like, there was this perception that Ohio State was taking a step back. I've always liked Will Howard. When he was at Kansas State, I was impressed with him. I thought when he transferred to Ohio State, it was a great move. But let's be honest, he's not as mobile as every Ohio State quarterback Iowa's faced in the last 10, 15 years. He's not Terrell Pryor. He's not Braxton Miller. He's not Justin Fields. He's not J.T. Barrett. Go down the list. So I'm not saying he's immobile. I'm not saying he's Deacon Hill-esque or Spencer Petras-esque. But if I'm Phil Parker, from a defensive perspective, I'm going to be very specific, as he always is, but I'm going to dial up pressure at times, and I'm going to be very aggressive when I do. I think that's number one, because if there's any part of that offense that's maybe taking a step back, it's the athleticism at the quarterback position. Can we all agree on that? Will Howard is
Except
not
that,
as athletic as all those guys I just named. Yes or no?
oh, nowhere close. But
Okay,
the last
exactly.
guy, CJ Stroud, just
I
was
know he didn't like to run. I get
strictly
it.
a pocket passer unless your name was Georgia and he had to try to win a national championship. That's when he finally got out of the
But
pocket and made some plays.
he
I'll make
didn't
one
need to,
comment
though.
about Phil Parker. If I'm Phil Parker, because Pat alluded to possibly gunning up to stop the run, I wouldn't do that if I was Phil Parker. I would trust my defensive line to play even up with Ohio State's offensive line. And there's no
Yeah.
way I'm exposing my secondary to those receivers.
No,
I would say we
no.
can play it
They're going
straight
to
up
sit.
and we need to stop your run. For as good as those running backs are, they still need blocking.
Correct. They're going to sit back. I'm not advocating for that. They're going to sit back in zone, try to play man on man up front, and figure out a way to at least contain, keep everything in front. That's Phil Parker's style against anybody, frankly, is to keep everything in front. So that fits into personnel against playing against Ohio State. What I'm saying is I think they have to be real aggressive when they do bring pressure, because I think they can have a chance to maybe make it count against this quarterback. And even, you brought up CJ Stroud not being a runner and choosing not to run. He was still always a threat to run. I think people that game planned him against him, watched him play, knew he can run if he needs to. He was not immobile. Will Howard does not make me. Will Howard is he's more athletic and more mobile than Cade McNamara, but he's not some dual threat guy. That's my point. So I'm just saying, be pointed and be aggressive when you do decide to bring pressure. And if they can get pressure with their front four, that's just icing on the cake, right? If they can get pressure with Deontay Craig and Brian Allen Jr. and Aaron Graves, great. But I do think what you said is fair. You're going to have to, especially you don't want to put your other cornerback who has struggled at times this year, whether it be Deshaun Lee or TJ Hall or John Nestor, on an island against one of the two, All-American receivers, Ibuka or Smith. I mean, I just don't think you do that. I think that would be that'd be suicide in a sense against this team. I guess my overall takeaways from Saturday's game, and I mentioned it last night, I don't have any problem saying this. I'm just being honest. I was not as impressed with Ohio State on Saturday as I expected to be. Michigan State turned the ball over 3 times in the red zone. 3 times, if you counted turnover on downs. That's a lot of self-inflicted wounds. Now, I'm not saying you don't give any credit to Ohio State for forcing fumbles or, obviously stopping a team on 4th and 1, but those are self-inflicted wounds. 38-7, yeah, that looks dominant, and the stats are still one-sided. But this is a first-year head coach at Michigan State, and I think a team that we can all probably expect to finish lower half of the Big Ten. So I'm looking for a silver lining here. I think there were probably some vulnerabilities that Tim Lester can find from tape Saturday, that Phil Parker can find on tape Saturday. And, hey, Iowa's not done real well out of bye weeks in recent years, but they haven't had a bye week under Coach Lester. So from an offensive perspective, and I said it last night as well, they're going to have to figure out a way to take a shot or two down the field. You're not going to be able to go into especially if they're trailing at halftime, like they were against Minnesota. It's unlikely that they're going to be able to come out in the second half and, hit a couple of early play action pass plays, maybe run naked outside and get a couple of tight ends to leak out and then just sit on it with the run. They're going to have to figure out, as Coach Patterson deems it, man beaters. And I don't know what that looks like, but you have a bye week to prepare. Ohio State does not. And not saying it's a trap game, but schedule-wise, it comes right before Oregon. There's that element that we haven't brought up as well.
What do you think, Pat?
I think you bring up a bunch of good points. I think we talked earlier, Steve Hellwagon and I, about the fact that Michigan State did bring some pressure on Howard. I think the Will Howard, he can run. He is a capable runner. We haven't seen it much because they haven't needed him to, other than a couple times down by the red zone. So I think that could be a factor one way or the other in this game for sure. I think what you guys both said about if you can get pressure with 4 guys against Ohio State, you're creating success that way. That gives the secondary more bodies back there to help cover. And, be it whether that's on the quarterback or getting tackles in the backfield or at least slowing down these running backs in the backfield. Obviously, that would be huge for the Hawkeyes. Look, the Buckeyes haven't faced a defense like this, not even close. I mean, Michigan State was the best defense they've faced. And, that's not the same as this Phil Parker defense. So this will tell us a lot about an Ohio State offense that has put up good numbers this season, but again, it hasn't really been tested. And then I think on the other side, we've touched on Caleb Johnson. Ohio State hasn't faced a running back like this. Let's be honest. Michigan State has a 2-headed monster. They are solid, but not as talented as this guy. So how do you handle that? I don't think Ohio State fears the passing game, but I also think you have to be aware of, putting too much into stopping Caleb Johnson and then, a big play over your head or something like that. I think it's good from a Buckeye perspective that, at least statistically, a guy like Caleb Downs had sort of a breakout game, so to speak. I think Caleb Downs has played well in each game. He just hasn't had the stats that he did at Alabama. Just before you play a game where he may be relied upon to help in coverage, but also come up and help stop the run. The linebackers for Ohio State have been mistake prone. Cody Simon has missed some tackles this season at middle linebacker. Sonny Styles has been a topic the last couple of weeks because he seems to get either attacking the wrong gap or filling the wrong gap, I should say, or just kind of getting lost in decision making. There was a play that resulted in one of those fumbles where the tight end had an option route and Sonny Styles just ended up flat-footed and was then 2 yards behind the tight end in the Michigan State game. So I think those are areas that teams have identified to target Ohio State. And I think Iowa certainly will do the same. Tight end play, as you brought up earlier, has been a factor in this series. So I would imagine that you would do that again, especially with a Lachey, both on the field and calling the game from the booth, as Luke's dad, Jim, is the radio guy for Ohio State.
Yeah, some storylines here, not just with Luke, but also with Caleb Johnson making his return to his home state. And then Caleb Brown, who's been kind of MIA. Lester kind of explained why last week, but could this be a coming out party? Can you read Shay Sykes's comment on the air, Mark? I love this. This is bringing me back to 2021, the Iowa-Michigan preview show when we were joined. Of course, I expect there's going to be. I'm assuming we're simulcasting this over on the Ohio State channel, so that's why we are Ohio State people that are coming out in droves to rip me. So again, opposing fan bases never like when I give any indicators that might be to Iowa's advantage. Like everything that I just outlined, I haven't even made a score prediction yet. And you gonna pull this comment up, Mark?
I can't find it. I don't
know. Here, I'll put it up on the screen for you. Just read it. Can you read it from start to finish?
Here we go.
I want you to read this.
Come on, Shay. This Iowa nerd is in for a rude awakening Saturday. You weren't impressed with us versus Michigan State? Well, prepare for your spanking Saturday incoming reality check.
I'm ready for my spanking, Shay. Just please hope that's not you that's giving it to me. So, hey, look, they may come out there and boat race Iowa. That's possible. I think if we get the Michigan State or the Ohio State the last 2 weeks, which may or may not happen, I think Iowa competes, and I think they're within reaching distance heading into the fourth. But I do believe that Ohio State's got another gear that we haven't seen yet. I mean, I just think the talent on paper would tell you that that's the case. I just don't know whether or not we're going to see that Saturday. We may, but I mean, that was a really talented 2017 team, and Iowa won by 30 plus. I'm not saying it's as good as this team. Believe me, I know the talent ratings would probably say otherwise. And that game was at home for Iowa. But I do think the way to win this game, ultimately, we outlined a bunch of keys or storylines to follow, if you will. But I think what you said earlier, Pat, Ohio State has no reason to fear the Iowa passing game. They don't. They don't have any reason to fear it at all. They shouldn't fear it. But I think that's ultimately the only real route to victory, in addition to doing all the things we talked about. And really, it starts with not giving up big plays. That's hard to do against Ohio State, maybe harder to do against that team than any other team in the country. Not giving up big plays, winning on turnovers, not just being even, but winning on turnovers, being competitive with critical downs, and hopefully, I would hope you can at least break even or be close on the ground. Again, tall task because that's a loaded running back room, but Iowa's proven to be really effective on the ground as well. But I think the only way Iowa really breaks through and finds a way to win is that they can hit a couple of plays. And if I'm Ohio State, Mark, this may be sort of reverse logic, but I almost think it would be in Ohio State's best interest to not go all out against Caleb Johnson, because it seems like that's the one thing they have to fear. So like, oh, we need to load up on Caleb Johnson and figure out a way to slow him down. I don't know that just a Caleb Johnson-led offense on Saturday is going to be enough to get it done against Ohio State. I think you're going to need something in the passing game. So why load up on Caleb Johnson? I go back to, basketball is a great analogy for this. There are games, and I'm a big Mavs fan. You watched Luka Doncic. I remember he scored like 80 against the Hawks last year, and that game still came down to the wire. Sometimes you just got to let a guy get his and try to make sure everything else is sealed tight. And I almost wonder if it's in Ohio State's best interest to kind of just play it a little safer on defense. Not because Iowa's passing game has given them any reason to be fearful, but you don't want to become overconfident, especially since this is a new offense and they've had a bye week to prepare.
Yeah. And another thing we haven't touched on, you sort of touched on, I guess, is that, you have that Oregon game coming, right? So if you are, let's say, Chip Kelly, and you're deciding, okay, how much do we need to really throw out in this game instead of saving some things that may come up in the Oregon game, the week before. And Chip Kelly has been asked about the playbook and how much has been seen a couple times this year. And it's kind of like, well, we don't hold anything back. It just depends on the opponent. And obviously Iowa's defense, Oregon's defense, very different. So maybe you attack them differently and that doesn't matter. But I do wonder, we've seen little bits of the Chip Kelly offense kind of each week, sort of wrinkles that he's pulled out. Do you do more of that now in a game where, you are playing the best defense you've faced, maybe the best defense you'll face this season until maybe Michigan, if then. So I'm certainly going to keep an eye on what is Chip Kelly willing to show, knowing that maybe he doesn't have to show a ton, but can still, get the job done, as opposed to in a week from now in Oregon, do you want that already on film type of thing? It'll be an interesting chess game in his own head about how far you want to go with some of the different things, the wrinkles that they can pull out.
The thing that you can always do, though, and I tend to agree with you, Corey, but if you do load up against Caleb Johnson and you get burned, then you just mark it off as we got burned. We're going to back out of that, and we're going to bring people back out of the box, and we got burned, and it's 7-0 or whatever. And we're going to play it more straight now because they proved that they could make that play.
Yeah, so maybe that's the approach. I don't know. I mean, how effective is Ohio State's defensive front as it relates to, do you guys think, to stopping an Iowa offensive line that's looked as good as any right now on the ground, and then a back to accompany it? Because this is an Iowa rushing attack that the major players in this conference have not seen in a long time.
Well, one question will be the health of Tyleik Williams, the defensive tackle, who didn't play the last two games. Now he is more of a pass rush factor, but just him being in there is a difference maker for Ohio State. He was available and dressed last week, so I think it was kind of an eye on, hey, we can use him if we need him against Michigan State, but we may need him more against Iowa. And then also contributing to that will be how much Ohio State plays three linebackers. Against Michigan State, they almost exclusively matched up based on personnel. So they went from two linebacker sets, which is their base defense, to the three when Michigan State, went to 12 personnel. I wonder if some of that was just to work on it in a game situation before you play an Iowa team where you will probably need to do more of that. It hasn't worked as well. I talked about some of the linebacking play earlier. I do think Arvell Reese, who comes in as that third linebacker, he's only a sophomore, didn't play much, only on special teams a year ago, but has shown a lot of knack to just go get the ball. And he seems to be a pretty short tackler. So he's a guy I would keep an eye on when they do go to those three linebacker sets. But again, we just haven't, the teams Ohio State's played, tried to spread them out. That's where they've had the most success. And, some quarterback run, things like that. It's just not stuff that I was going to do. So judging kind of how Ohio State will react and how effective it'll be is kind of a guessing game at this point.
And Ohio State and Iowa are third and fourth in the country, respectively, in rush defense to this point.
Yeah.
So, and accompanying really solid rush offenses. So those numbers, although Ohio State's incredibly skilled at the receiver position, I would have to think strength against strength. It's which run game can succeed, right?
Sure.
I mean, to simplify things, Mark.
Yeah, I think where Iowa could have an advantage, I don't think it's clear cut until we see it actually play out on the field. But again, it's the Iowa defensive front. Even though this isn't one of the stronger Iowa defensive fronts, it's still a really good one against Ohio State's offensive line. I think that's where, if Iowa ends up pulling off an upset or hanging in this game, that's going to be the first place where we're going to see them be able to take advantage. And then the last thing, Pat, before we let you go, is Corey hit on the defensive front. You talked about Tyleik Williams. This Ohio State defensive front, and maybe this is part of the Ohio State fan mindset, and I'll buy into this myself. It never looks good enough. It's always got to be perfect. It's got to be better. You got to win by 50. Is that the defensive line is extremely good. Top 3-4 in the nation would be what most people would rate this defensive line, but it just doesn't seem to impose its will and get to the quarterback at the frequency that you would expect based on the talent level.
Yeah, the talent is certainly there. You've got 2 5-star starting defensive ends, both seniors. I mentioned Tyleik Williams. Ty Hamilton, the younger brother of Devon Hamilton, who's in the NFL, has really come along and developed now in his 5th year. But yeah, I mean, if you just look at the production game in and game out, it's not like these ends are getting the quarterback frequently. Now, you ask the coaching staff about it. They talk about teams getting the ball out quickly and not a lot of drop back passing. There's some of that. The Marshall game was the most frustrating for Buckeye fans because that seemed like a game where you could get after the quarterback a little bit. And they did get the ball out quick, but the ends weren't winning their battles up front. I think you and I talked about that, Mark. Just consistently like you'd expect against a Big Ten team playing a Sun Belt team. But then there are moments like, and I forget the exact situation, but I know it was Michigan State was kind of driving, and JT Tuimoloau just blows up his man and sacks the quarterback Childs last week. And it's like, oh, that's what he can do. And he seems to do it in big moments. Jack Sawyer, same thing, like came alive in the Cotton Bowl last year when Ohio State was on its third quarterback and needed somebody to show up defensively. So like it's there. Are they able to bring it enough in a game like this or a game, in 2 weeks against Oregon, things like that, on enough plays to really make a big difference? But yeah, you're right, Mark. I mean, the talent is not in question. It's just, I don't know if it's motor. I don't know if it's motivation because they don't need to do it. I don't, some of it may even be scheme in terms of just kind of, we don't need to get to the quarterback every play because we are talented elsewhere. So let's make sure we don't let anything sneak out, especially against a mobile quarterback or, a running back that may sneak out of the pocket space and, catch a pass. And now we don't have anyone covering him. So yes, to answer your question, I think they have the talent to be consistently causing problems with the defensive line, but just for one reason or another, and I listed a couple there, it doesn't happen consistently.
Pat Murphy, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Folks, get on over there. Check out Pat's work at bucknuts.com. Pat, is there anything else in regards to podcasts or articles, anything in particular you want to point people to?
No, not yet this week. We'll see how the week goes. We had interviews with the coaches today, so just stay tuned. We'll have plenty of stuff on this game going forward, and I'll talk with our Iowa guys as we get later in the week to kind of break down both sides of the matchup, similar to what we just did here, which is always
very
fun.
good. Awesome. Pat, appreciate you being here.
Of course. Thanks, guys.
There we have it. The more you talk about this matchup, the more nervous I get.
Well, I don't know why people are this is not, nothing like Michigan, but why is it that when we break down the game, unless the inferior opponent or the team that appears to be inferior, the analyst for that inferior opponent just completely lays down and says, "Oh, you're better, Mark, you're better." Why is it that people take such offense to that? I don't understand why they don't like. It's like they take it personally.
It's obvious Ohio State's supposed to be decidedly better. Therefore, we are going to have a discussion to determine how does Iowa win this game.
Right. Yeah. So,
and I think that combination of Iowa defensive line, Ohio State good offensive line, but it's not a dominant offensive line, and they're still figuring some things out. It's really good on the left side, has some issues on the right side, coupled with Ohio State missing run fits, as Pat was alluding to at the linebacking position. That then, I'm sorry, I was going both sides of the ball at the same time there. But in regards to Iowa's defensive front, possibly being an advantage. I'm not saying it definitely is, but that would be the first place I would go is Iowa's defensive front. The Iowa offensive line against Ohio State's defensive line is just a ridiculously good, high-end elite matchup.
Yeah.
But if Iowa's offensive line is able to have the kind of success opening holes that it did against other teams, we'll put Iowa State and Minnesota in the same type category. Ohio State's better, but those are capable defenses that Ohio State has had issues with the linebackers not filling at the right time, at the right place. And then you've got busted gains downfield.
So we can quickly do this. We've done this before. I know we like to do it with Levi Stevenson every year, but let's run through position by position. Okay. And let's just see. We can tally this up, I guess. Let's start with quarterback. I think you and I would both take Will Howard over Ohio State, right? So I'll just make a little tally here off to the side. So we're both taking Will Howard. Running back,
Ohio State.
But Iowa does have the second leading rusher in the country.
They have one excellent running back, and a really good running back room.
Yeah, they have but you're giving Ohio State the edge.
Oh, I think they have the best two backs.
You think they have the best two backs
together? I'm not saying they're the two best backs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'll give you. Yeah. Some Iowa fans will just get real mad at that, Mark, because they love them some Caleb Johnson. That's fine. Tight ends, I take Iowa. Is that fair? Come on now. Come on now. I don't know anything about Ohio State's tight ends, but
they got three of them that are really good. They're going to be pros, but Iowa's going to use their tight ends. Those guys aren't needed.
Iowa has pros in its tight ends room every year.
They might. So does Ohio State. Ohio State has gone almost 30 years without producing an NFL tight end.
They've gone almost 30 years without producing one?
I'm sorry. They've gone. One of our Ohio State guys, Tony Gerdeman, gave me this stat. It's been since 1996 since an Ohio State starting tight end did not play in the NFL.
Oh, okay. Well,
but anyway, they're obviously not. We're not talking about history, where Iowa, of course, is the best at the tight end room. But I'll go Iowa.
Okay, and then how about offensive line versus Ohio State's offensive line? Got to go Iowa's, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we go Iowa's offensive line, Ohio State's defensive line versus Iowa's defensive line.
Ohio State. We miss wide receiver, right?
We'll get there. Calm down.
Oh, okay.
I know you're
Well,
excited
you
to say
went to the
Ohio
other side
State.
of the ball. Is the only reason I
I'm just
stopped
going
you.
randomly.
Oh, okay.
Linebacker.
Iowa.
Okay. So actually, as of right now, we're 3-3. But then we'll go to the what did I miss?
Secondary
Receiver. Yeah, let's go to
and
receiver
receiver.
first, and then we'll go back to set. So secondary, excuse me, receiver, obviously Ohio State, and then secondary, probably Ohio State. Right?
Yes, Iowa's very capable, but yes, I'm going to go Ohio
If we want to
State.
separate safeties versus corners, I'm guessing I'd give it to Ohio State in both categories.
Yes.
So 5-3. That doesn't mean that that's going to be the margin, like, times that by 8 or
No.
whatever. But,
No.
I think there are, as we mentioned earlier, Pat brought it up, there are players on the Iowa team that are motivated for this game because they have strong ties to the state of Ohio. This is their one chance to go home and get a win. You got Luke Lachey. This is his last game against his dad's team, and he's going to be right there in Columbus as his dad calls the game from the press box. That's an intriguing storyline. And Luke Lachey's been pretty quiet this year, Mark. It's a new offense, but I just feel like tight end involvement has been pretty quiet. And honestly, Don Patterson brought it up last night. I'd be curious to go back and look at targets. Addison Estringa may be getting as many targets right now as Luke Lachey is. And Hayden Large has had some targets. I wouldn't be surprised to see Zach Ortworth get some run Saturday. And he's a guy, you talk about man burners. If there's any tight end on this roster who's proven the ability to get loose down the field, go back to Wisconsin on the road last year. It was Zach Ortworth playing as a true freshman who got loose for a big gain for a super explosive play. They've got to figure out some way to get the ball downfield. And as Coach Patterson's brought out, it doesn't always mean throwing the ball over the top. But perfect example, first play from scrimmage in the second half for Iowa. They go first down, naked right, and they send the tight end from the opposite side of the formation across the formation, and simple little pass, and Addison Estringa leaks for like 25, 30 yards. I don't know that it'll be that simple, but good game planning can be very powerful regardless of talent level. And I think, that's one of those things. If they can hit on a play, I would think early, not, I don't know that they're going to be able to be in a position third quarter to save those. I think if they have a play or two, they may have to hit one of those early. I just think that if you can figure out a way like they did 2 years ago, they got a great play out of Joe Evans. Maybe the best play. I'd say that was the best play of the 2022 season. Remember the play? Joe Evans busts through the defense of the offensive line, hits CJ Stroud, forces a fumble, and then just picks the ball up and runs into the end zone. A great athletic play for a former quarterback out of Ames High.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter because they had no offense to do anything.
He was the offense.
That was an incredible play, frankly. But all those things, I mean, we ran through a lot. Is there anything that we missed, Mark, or that Pat missed that you think is a major storyline heading into this game?
Just came to me. I don't know that anyone's talking about this. It's a great Iowa defense. It's led by arguably the best in the game, Phil Parker. What is different about the Ohio State offense? They gave Chip Kelly a ton of money. He may be the highest paid assistant coach in college football. I know he's like in the top 5. They did that for a reason. All these other really good Ohio State teams that have been going to national championship games and all this other business have been led on offense by a head coach who's been play calling at the same time as being the head coach. And I think he has slowly determined that that wasn't the best route and maybe got a nudge or two. So they go out and get a guy that's supposed to be one of the best in the game, has been in the past, in Chip Kelly, for matchups like this. So Ryan Day is not diverted by 2 years ago planning against a Phil Parker defense by himself. Not by himself, but he is the guy as the head coach / offensive coordinator. Now, Chip Kelly has been probably scratching his head and staying up all night trying to figure out this Iowa defense, but at least he's been the one focused on that solely. And knowing Chip Kelly and knowing Ohio State's preparation and their talent gap over all these other teams, they've probably been talking and looking at Iowa, all off season. So that is one place where I'm not saying that Ohio State's better than they've been in the past, but certainly they shelled out the money and changed responsibilities to be better for as prolific as they've been throwing the football and scoring points to be even better offensively.
I want to hit two things before we log off. One, and one of them is in the chat, the super chat from Doug. But the other one, Mark, that I want to cover, somebody brought it up earlier, but how important is it that Iowa's competitive in this game as it relates to their 12-team playoff chances? Because as Iowa State continues to win, and people are blowing Iowa State's success way out of proportion. They haven't played anybody yet. I mean, people literally last night, this success for Iowa State is great. They have not done anything yet. Houston's horrible. Okay, they're horrible. So they went down and beat a horrible Houston team. Congratulations. Now, they're ranked relatively high right now in the polls. My point being, assuming Iowa State can prove that they are a good football team and a competitor for the 12-team playoff, if that's one of Iowa's two losses, a close loss to Iowa State in September, we talked about this preseason, and maybe it comes to fruition, and then a close loss to Ohio State, I think they're in contention, solid contention at that point if Iowa runs the table. But how important is it that Iowa keeps this game relatively competitive, and what would that look like to you, even in a loss?
So who was the second best team that Iowa was going to play in the Big Ten? Who would that be?
Nebraska?
Exactly.
Right now?
So
I mean,
they're playing, unless something drastically changes, they're playing one of the three best teams in the country this Saturday. Then the next best game in the Big Ten is against the 30th best team in the country. So I think this is very important for Iowa to show. I think the committee has always looked at it as, we want to make sure that we're selecting teams that belong, quote, belong, like are not going to get embarrassed and have not given us indicators that they're going to get embarrassed.
I mean, could Michigan State end up being there? I mean, we projected preseason, but we didn't know exactly what the Big Ten would look like. And now we're starting to see it as we've got a couple of these teams having already played two conference games and another Power 4 opponent. But yeah, like Washington, they beat Northwestern, but they've not looked good by any means. Michigan State had flashes against Ohio State. They still lost by 31. Wisconsin, we haven't seen anything that's been convincing that Luke Fickell's turned the corner in year 2. UCLA's looked horrible at times. Maryland's 0-2 in the conference. It's as favorable, and we didn't mention Northwestern. They're horrible. It's as favorable of a schedule as one could imagine, Mark, this new Big Ten.
Except for this week, it is.
Except for this week. Now, honestly, Mark, is it possible that we go back at the end of this year and look back at the Minnesota game and say that was one of Iowa's 3 best Big Ten wins? Because they won it on the road
against Michigan.
Maybe. Yeah, the way they played against Michigan second half. We'll see what Minnesota does, but the fact they won that game on the road, each of these games is still really important. You almost wish they had an Illinois or an Indiana on the schedule. But the bottom line is I still think the committee will have to make some decisions. If Iowa's competitive in this game with how they lost to Iowa State, but here's the bottom line. If they do this, I don't even know why we're talking about it, even though I'm the one who brought it up, because if they do that, if they go 10-2, Mark, that will mean that they were 8-1 in the conference. I think they're likely in the Big Ten title game at that point. Yeah. So it won't matter because they're going to have a chance to either lose again or beat a really good team in Indy. And I think if they lose again, regardless who it is, the committee's going to look at that point, Mark, and say Iowa played 3 really good teams in 2024. They lost to all of them. Does that sound familiar? Like 2023? That's what the committee's going to do if that happens. Even if Iowa State keeps winning, they lost to 3 really good teams on their way to a 10-3 record. They're out. If they go to the Big Ten championship game and beat an Ohio State or an Oregon or a whoever, Penn State, all of a sudden you're looking at this and saying, okay, they went 11-2, Big Ten title, win against Penn State, and 2 tight losses. They're in. So I don't really know that it will matter because I think if they go 10-2, it will all get sorted out in Indy. That's my bold take here on October 1st.
I think you're correct. I think that the only thing that keeps them out of Indy is some kind of strange, crazy tiebreaker, because that's possible. Because now that we've got all these teams, USC doesn't play Iowa or Ohio State or Oregon. USC is looking at a situation where they're playing Penn State in 2 weeks. That's going to be their season as it pertains to the Big Ten. If they win that game against Penn State, then look out. They're probably going to finish 8-1. And Penn State's in a similar situation where they may finish 8-1. You could have all sorts of strange, like 3-way tie at 8-1, or a 4-way tie for first place. 4 8-1 teams.
If you're Iowa and you're already looking ahead at the Big Ten championship, you're probably hoping. I guess you're probably rooting for. Who are you rooting for in that Penn State USC game? That's in what'd you say, a week? So who's? I don't know who you're rooting for in that
Penn
one.
State.
Why though?
Because they've got a tougher schedule. They've got to play Ohio State.
Yeah, but that still puts them at just one loss. They don't play anybody else. They play Maryland, Minnesota, Washington, Purdue, and Wisconsin. You'd have to hope Penn State loses to a Wisconsin. That's what I'm saying. Like you might be right. They may end up with 3 or more teams with one loss.
Think about this. Between Iowa, Ohio State, Oregon, USC, Penn State, did I just name 5 teams? Yes, 5 teams. Let's say 4 of them. 4 of them could go 8-1 because they just don't play each other. Now we know other teams are going to jump up and pull off upsets. But yeah, some of the scenarios that I feared and played out when this conference got too big, in terms of having legitimate tiebreakers to decide which team should be in Indy when they're just not going to be there.
So all those things are possibilities, but I think it also is still fair to say it's most likely that if Iowa goes 10-2, they're in the Big Ten championship game. Most
likely, yes.
Because I think it's still more likely that either they win in a tiebreaker scenario, or there's not a tiebreaker scenario, they have to win. You get what I'm saying? Like,
and then Iowa wants Ohio State just to clean the deck.
Yes.
Beat Penn State, beat Oregon, just be undefeated.
And then play them again in Indy. And Mark, there's a couple super chats that if you want to hit these before we
absolutely
sign off. And for people that don't know, you and I are going to be chatting again tomorrow during your Ohio State show. I'm going to hop on with you guys for a little while tomorrow morning so people have time.
Yes. So the Buckeyes live shows at 11 a.m. Eastern, at 10 Central, and we get Corey for a few minutes. So be looking out for that. Mike 3883, thank you so much for the super chat. Go Buckeyes. Brian wasn't the problem. Kirk is. Okay. Well, Mike, we enjoy you being here. You know that.
Yep.
Somebody did mention to Kirk during the news conference today that he has never won in Columbus, but they also mentioned, it was funny because his response was perfect. The reporter said something like, well, is that something you would like to accomplish? Like, oh, yeah. and he's like, well, not for me personally, but that means, that we could win Saturday. Yeah. That's
I thought
why we're doing this. That's
another good response would probably have been, I'm sure almost every current Big Ten head coach is there any current Big Ten head coach that has won in Columbus? Think about that. Think about that. Ryan Day, or excuse me, not Ryan Day. Who did I just have in my mind?
Because Jim Harbaugh and Mark D'Antonio are the last 2. They're the only 2 that have won in the last 13 years.
Luke Fickell never took his Cincinnati team in there.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
And didn't win. He lost 42-0 in 2019.
Cincinnati came to Columbus and lost 42-0?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Doug, Hawkeye in Ames. Hi, Corey. How many Big 12 and how many Big 10 teams make the college football playoff?
Oh, okay. Well, I saw the latest news. I'm sure you've covered that the Big Ten and the SEC are looking for 4 automatic bids moving forward. But I still think there's a chance that the Big Ten gets 4 in this year. And I think there's a chance that the SEC gets 4 in this year. That would leave You obviously have the G5, right? The G5 AQ, so to speak, the highest ranked G5 program that gets in. And then that would leave the ACC, the Big 12, and then a couple at-large teams. Am I correct? How many we
Well,
got?
you're going 4 Big
4,
10, 4
8,
SEC. That's 8. 1 for the
8.
Big 12, 1 for the ACC is 10. The G5 makes 11. So either a Notre Dame or another one for the ACC or the Big 12.
So yeah, one other at-large. Or is it? Do you think there's any possibility that? I'm guessing you'll say no, but is there any possibility if you have two, like a James Madison and a UNLV, that they could get two G5 teams in?
What do you think I'm going to say?
I know you're going to say no, but I mean,
No,
those two,
no way
both
in
those
hell.
teams have looked really good.
No,
But they
no
both look. Can you just
way.
admit they both looked really good so far?
Way.
Okay, all right. They haven't looked good.
They
Never
could
mind. You
expand the
suck.
playoff to 24 teams, and they're not getting a second team in.
And that's too bad to an extent. That's unfortunate.
All right. Lemansky says, Mark, regarding Chip, best money can buy versus development program in Iowa. Ooh, Lemansky, what's going on here? The Dallas Cowboys of the Big Ten special teams wins it for the Hawks. Oh, see, sometimes I've heard this out of usually Michigan fans that Ohio State is the Dallas Cowboys of the Big Ten, but the Dallas Cowboys don't win championships. So I don't really understand I understand the glitz and the money or whatever you want to, the resources, but I don't get the conversion into the wins.
But you know what? That analogy, that is such a carryover from the 20th century Cowboys teams, because Don Patterson used to talk about that when he would recruit kids up here. He used to tell Texas kids, hey, we're the Dallas Cowboys of Iowa, right? Because there's no pro sports team in Iowa. So this is Iowa's team. And it worked, right? That's so I don't know if there's a little bit of that in Lemansky's comments here.
But he's saying that about Ohio State, isn't he?
He may be. Yeah, I read that the same way.
I don't really get that.
I guess final thing, Mark, we didn't talk anything about special teams, and I think that's a little unfair of us because Drew Stevens has been really good. He's 6 of 6, and he's made some long kicks so far. He's perfect on PATs, and Reese Dakin's coming off his best performance. And speaking of punters, man, Torrey Taylor, what he did for the Bears, I don't know if you've seen some of that, but he was phenomenal on Sunday for the Bears, basically single-handedly put them. They showed I've seen this going viral this week on social media after that game. Every time he punted, the Bears' chances of winning went like this. Like every time he punted, it was like climbing a ladder, and they managed to win. He was just a masterpiece. 60-yard punt. Somewhere. Oh, absolutely. So you wonder, how much of I would think you give, that's the one position we didn't run through. I'd probably, without even knowing what Ohio State has, I'd probably give Iowa the not on special teams. And
Ohio State's fine, but it's Iowa.
Yeah, so there you go. I guess if you look at it from that perspective, 5-4, maybe it's not as lopsided. And I will say this, people want to talk about Ohio State and how much better they are at receiver than Iowa. And obviously the Iowa receivers aren't going up against the Ohio State receivers. But for the sake of this discussion, yes, Ohio State's receivers are exponentially better than Iowa's. But I would venture to say, based on what you've said and what Pat said earlier and what I know about Iowa's linebackers might be exponentially better than Ohio State's. You have 2 All-Americans.
In production, yeah.
They're still really talented.
Yeah, they're talented guys. They're both 5 stars. But
so they're
not playing well.
If you say that Iowa's linebackers and Ohio State's receivers cancel each other out, you're probably right. Ohio State's linebackers are probably more talented than Iowa's receivers. But again, we've seen a difference. We've seen a difference through 1 month. And I've been predicting since August that we're going to see a jump with Iowa's pass game and production in the passing game. Now, maybe it won't happen this week because they're going up against a really good opponent and really good defense. But I do think the bye week will serve them well and maybe a stepping stone to running the table after this week, regardless of result.
You don't buy into the betting numbers. I'm not a big betting guy, but I am intrigued by the numbers. I don't lay money on games, but I do enjoy all of that. And I still remember your response. And this, I am not in any way criticizing you, but I remember your response, and it's well justified. And I understand what your response was, the off season prior to the last time they played in Columbus. This was like 3 or 4 months before the season started. And I said, Ohio State's going to be like a 25-point favorite in that game. And you were like, flab. And I understand why. It sounds ridiculous. And they ended up being a 30-point favorite, and they won by 44. This week, they started a 24-point favorite. I think it's down to 19 or something.
Yeah, I saw 20.5 at last check. But yeah.
I saw 20.5. That's what I posted actually on a banner that I didn't use. But anyway, I saw some 19s out there. Now, our betting guy, Steve Merrill from Wager Talk, would say that actually the public usually moves the line the wrong way. They don't know what they're doing. That's what he says usually happens. I think I would still favor Iowa, even with that point reduction at this point.
Yeah, I'm by no means going out on a limb and predicting Iowa. I'll give my prediction here later in the week, but I feel better than I did preseason. Even though I know Ohio State could explode Saturday and beat any team by double digits, but I have cautiously optimistic based on what I've seen. I don't feel like Ohio State has been quite as dominant in certain areas as I expected them to be, and so that makes me more positive based on preseason expectations.
That's perfectly fair. And again, just to cut it straight on Will Howard, your evaluation on the running situation, I do not disagree with that. He's nowhere close to the athlete that those other guys are, but he's a willing runner and capable. Let's put him in that category. All right, everyone. We appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Again, Corey, Coach Patterson after the game. And then Corey gets together with me and the Ohio State crew on Wednesday. That's going to be on both channels again, 11 a.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Central. Corey, appreciate you doing this, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Mark.